power often arrives quietly, long before anyone notices. Yet, from a young age, we are taught to wait for a nod of approval, for a certificate, for someone else to declare us worthy. Schools, workplaces, even social circles reinforce the idea that recognition must come externally. They promise safety, structure, and legitimacy, but what they cultivate instead is hesitation. A capable man stands ready, yet lingers in the shadows, conditioned to believe that moving without consent is reckless. He measures himself not against his own potential, but against the approval of a system that may never acknowledge him. We are told to earn permission before acting. Promotions, titles, accolades, all markers that supposedly validate our existence and capability. The paradox is quiet but persistent. The moment we wait, life moves without us. Opportunities vanish while we measure ourselves against rules designed by others. Observant men notice this. There is competence in their hands, ideas in their minds, yet a subtle restraint keeps them from stepping forward. This restraint feels rational because it is socially reinforced. Yet beneath the rationality is a tension, a quiet frustration at being capable yet confined. Consider how many talents have been sidelined simply because someone was not ready or lacked credentials. Waiting becomes a ritual. We memorize procedures, attend meetings, and polish resumes as if these actions alone can unlock authority. But authority is rarely handed down as promised. It emerges in subtle ways, often for those who bypass the ritual entirely, who act quietly, deliberately, without seeking permission. The tension grows as the observer recognizes this pattern. There is a quiet discomfort. The system rewards patience, but those who act decisively often outpace it. This tension mirrors a universal truth: waiting for permission is a construct. Civilization, hierarchy, bureaucracy, they encourage compliance, often at the cost of initiative. Yet in private, capable men feel the pull of action, the awareness of what could be achieved if external validation were not a prerequisite. They recognize the quiet gap between what they can do and what they are told to do. A reflective mind notices this dissonance, the friction between skill and approval. It is uncomfortable because it is invisible to others, yet deeply tangible internally. The most influential figures in history rarely sought permission. They observed, they learned, they built quietly. Their power emerged not because they were granted authority, but because they cultivated capability without waiting for recognition. It is a subtle lesson, one often obscured by the noise of accolades and titles. The viewer, now observing this pattern, begins to ask themselves, why wait? Why tether action to approval when competence can generate opportunity silently, naturally? In this quiet reflection, the stage is set. The idea that power begins only when permitted is challenged. A subtle curiosity forms: what if the moments we wait are the very moments we could have acted? The tension lingers, inviting the mind to observe not just the world, but one's own hesitation within it. It is a small, almost imperceptible unease, but one that primes the intellect and the imagination, preparing the way for the lessons that follow. Power is rarely handed down like a gift. It is not something that appears on a resume or a certificate. Instead, it is quietly constructed, brick by brick, in ways that the world may never notice. Skill is honed in solitude, knowledge gathered through observation, and understanding deepened through reflection. Relationships are cultivated with precision, not for appearances, but for influence when it matters most. In this sense, power resembles architecture. It requires planning, patience, and an appreciation for structure that only the careful mind can see. Recognition, if it comes, is merely a byproduct. History offers examples of men who understood this truth intuitively. They did not wait for permission to step into relevance. They created the conditions that made their presence unavoidable. Leonardo da Vinci, born outside the bounds of formal institutions, filled notebooks with inventions, anatomical studies, and designs that no one yet asked for. His influence grew in layers, technical skill, artistic mastery, and applied knowledge long before he became celebrated. Niccolò Machiavelli, observing the chaotic politics of Florence, studied rulers and systems with a meticulous eye, documenting the mechanisms of authority without being part of them. Both men understood that waiting for permission would be folly. Construction precedes recognition. The process of assembling power often requires patience and invisibility. It is built when no one is watching, in spaces free from judgment or expectation. Every skill learned, every insight gained, every network nurtured contributes to a foundation that others will eventually notice, though the architect may remain in the shadows. These foundations are resilient because they are personal, crafted deliberately, and not contingent on the whim of authority. The individual who acts in silence gains an independence that titles alone cannot provide. By examining Da Vinci and Machiavelli, we begin to see patterns that transcend time. Both navigated unstable environments filled with ambition, intrigue, and sudden reversals of fortune. Neither relied on permission, both relied on preparation, adaptability, and awareness. Their methods suggest a fundamental principle: power is assembled through deliberate action, cultivated quietly, and revealed strategically. The curiosity emerges naturally: how did they manage to operate inside systems without yielding to them, without bending to external control? This shift in perspective invites a subtle reflection. If power can be constructed privately, then waiting for approval becomes not just unnecessary, but counterproductive. Observation, skill, and strategy offer a path that bypasses permission entirely. In contemplating this, the viewer begins to imagine their own capacity to assemble influence silently, to act without announcing intentions, and to cultivate authority in ways that resonate beyond immediate recognition. It is a quiet empowerment, a promise of capability realized through deliberate design. History has a way of revealing patterns to those who look closely. Across centuries, influence rarely comes from those who wait for recognition, it emerges from those who act before the world notices. In many eras, power is not a reward but a consequence of preparation, observation, and timing. The keen eye sees opportunity where others see risk, and subtle action often outpaces loud ambition. This principle becomes strikingly clear when we turn to Renaissance Florence, a city both brilliant and perilous, where art, politics, and betrayal existed side by side. Florence was a place of sudden reversals. Wealthy families rose and fell, alliances shifted overnight, and influence was fleeting unless carefully maintained. Titles could be bought, lost, or rendered meaningless by the next twist of fortune. In such a volatile environment, waiting for official approval was a trap. A man who hesitated risked irrelevance, while those who moved quietly could embed themselves at the heart of power. Observation and discretion became more valuable than declarations and ostentation. Leonardo da Vinci did not arrive fully formed as a master. His early years were spent learning, sketching, experimenting, and quietly refining skills that would later command attention. Likewise, Machiavelli was not born a strategist feared across courts. He first observed, recorded, and studied the mechanisms of authority. Their advantage lay in understanding the system from within while maintaining enough distance to maneuver freely. This pattern, hidden in the layers of history, suggests a subtle inversion: instability favors those who act deliberately, even if invisibly. The most effective operators are often unseen, learning the rhythms of power before stepping into the spotlight. For the reflective viewer, the stage is set to explore not just individual mastery, but the interplay between chaos, observation, and influence. The Renaissance becomes more than a backdrop, it becomes a laboratory for understanding how quiet preparation can shape the course of events. By tracing these movements, curiosity naturally emerges. How did these men position themselves amid uncertainty? What strategies allowed them to convert observation into authority? As the narrative unfolds, the viewer begins to recognize that acting before recognition is not a gamble but a design, and that patterns from centuries past hold enduring lessons for those willing to notice. Leonardo da Vinci entered the world in circumstances that could easily have defined him as an outsider. Born illegitimate in 1452, he lacked the social status and formal recognition that often dictated opportunity in Renaissance Italy. Many doors, particularly in academic and professional circles, were closed to him from birth. Yet within these limitations lay a subtle advantage, one that would shape the course of his life and work. Freed from the rigid expectations of classical education, Leonardo was not constrained by the formulas and doctrines that confined his contemporaries. He was permitted, almost by necessity, to learn on his own terms. This freedom allowed him to cultivate an unfiltered curiosity. He observed the world meticulously: water currents, bird flight, human anatomy, mechanical devices, and the subtle interplay of light and shadow. Without the pressure to conform to prescribed methods, his mind wandered across disciplines, drawing connections others could not see. Where others sought validation through titles or degrees, he measured himself against reality itself. Every experiment, sketch, or study became a building block of understanding, accumulating into a vast reservoir of knowledge that no external authority could grant or revoke. Being on the margins sharpened his perception. Excluded from elite circles, he had to rely on observation, intuition, and ingenuity. He developed a heightened awareness of his surroundings, noticing patterns and relationships that those inside conventional hierarchies often overlooked. This marginal position was not a weakness, it was a lens through which he could examine the world with clarity. Each disadvantage became a tool, a source of adaptability that permitted him to move fluidly between art, engineering, and science without the constraints of rigid specialization. Leonardo's outsider status also influenced his strategic thinking. He learned to navigate the systems of patronage and politics subtly, presenting value in ways that addressed the needs of powerful patrons without surrendering his independence. By remaining unbound to traditional paths, he could experiment boldly, creating innovations in anatomy, flight, and engineering that others might have deemed impractical or inappropriate. His ability to operate outside established structures became a form of quiet leverage, allowing him to accumulate skill and reputation simultaneously. For the reflective viewer, this story reframes what is often perceived as limitation. Exclusion or marginalization need not be a barrier, it can instead be a source of freedom. Constraints force creativity, sharpen attention, and foster resilience. Where the system imposes rules, the outsider discovers opportunities. Leonardo's life illustrates that power and mastery do not require permission, they require focus, observation, and the courage to explore paths that others cannot or will not take. In contemplating his outsider advantage, the audience begins to see their own circumstances differently. Disadvantages, whether social, educational, or professional, can be transformed into instruments of strategic flexibility. The narrative subtly nudges the viewer to reflect on personal limitations, to recognize how constraint can foster growth, and to imagine a version of themselves capable of acting decisively without waiting for approval. In Leonardo's story, Being outside the system is not a deficit, it is a lens for vision, a quiet tool for assembling influence and skill that will eventually be undeniable. Leonardo's brilliance was not a product of luck or sudden recognition, it was the result of relentless, deliberate mastery across multiple disciplines. His notebooks, filled with sketches and observations, reveal a mind that refused to be confined. Anatomy, engineering, military design, hydraulics, botany, painting, all were fields he explored with equal intensity. Each study was a thread, weaving together a complex fabric of knowledge that few could match. Importantly, he pursued these skills quietly, without the need for immediate recognition or external approval. Mastery itself became his leverage, independent of audience or patron. This multidimensional competence meant that when opportunity arose, Leonardo was uniquely prepared. A ruler seeking a military engineer, an architect, or an innovative artist would find a solution already waiting in his mind and in his sketches. He had cultivated a readiness that transcended titles or positions. His value was embedded in ability itself, not in the announcements, accolades, or social proof that most sought before action. Competence attracted necessity, those in power could not ignore it when it aligned with their needs. The subtle power of skill lies in its quiet accumulation. Each observation, experiment, or invention was an investment that matured over time. Leonardo's reputation, though eventually immense, was a byproduct of decades spent honing expertise in silence. He did not rely on visibility to open doors. His readiness and capability created natural invitations. This principle extends beyond Renaissance Florence. Competence, when nurtured deeply, compels recognition without force or spectacle. It is leverage constructed invisibly yet fundamentally strong. For the audience, this reframes the pursuit of mastery. Visibility and recognition are temporary, skill is enduring. The man who invests in ability quietly is not waiting for validation, he is shaping influence before the world notices. Leonardo's approach demonstrates that expertise compounds, positioning an individual to act decisively when opportunity and need intersect. Reflecting on this, viewers begin to see their own potential differently. Time spent refining skill is never wasted, even if unnoticed. The quiet accumulation of mastery becomes a tool of strategic power, a preparation that creates invitations without effort or announcement. Influence, in its most resilient form, emerges not from who shouts the loudest, but from who is ready when it matters most. Leonardo understood that skill alone was not always enough, it needed to be communicated in a way that aligned with the desires and priorities of those in power. In a famous letter to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, he did not present himself merely as an artist seeking patronage. Instead, he highlighted his abilities as a military engineer, offering solutions to problems the Duke might face in warfare and city defense. Every line of the letter was deliberate, demonstrating value rather than pleading for opportunity. He framed his mastery strategically, showing how it could serve the needs of those in authority. This letter illustrates a subtle but crucial principle: influence requires articulation. Leonardo's brilliance would have been wasted if it remained invisible, admired only privately or within small circles. By understanding the context and desires of the Duke, he positioned himself as indispensable without arrogance. He did not demand recognition, he offered utility, presenting his skills as instruments of power that could address immediate challenges. The tone is confident, yet measured, revealing a man aware of both his capabilities and the environment in which they would be applied. Strategic self-presentation is different from self-promotion. It is not about boasting or exaggerating, it is about communicating relevance. Leonardo demonstrated this by aligning his abilities with the practical needs of his audience. His letter shows that even extraordinary skill must be paired with insight into timing, perception, and human priorities. A carefully positioned offer can open doors that raw competence alone might never touch. For the viewer, this section highlights a critical lesson: quiet mastery is powerful, but articulation transforms it into opportunity. The combination of skill and strategic framing allows one to step into influence without confrontation or entitlement. Leonardo's approach encourages reflection on how personal abilities can be communicated effectively, creating leverage through intelligence rather than insistence. By observing this, the audience begins to understand that influence often emerges not from what you know, but from how you present what you know in ways that intersect with the needs of others. Timing, relevance, and clarity convert preparation into tangible entry into structures of power, illustrating that quiet capability, paired with strategic articulation, can be a form of subtle authority in itself. Niccolò Machiavelli spent much of his early career embedded within the intricate machinery of Florentine politics. As a diplomat, he traveled to courts, observing kings, princes, and generals with meticulous attention. His role was not to wield power directly, but to witness it in motion, to note how authority was claimed, maintained, and often lost in an instant. While others around him sought titles, favor, or immediate influence, Machiavelli focused on understanding the structures themselves. He learned to see beyond the surface, reading the subtle cues of ambition, fear, and strategy that governed every decision within those courts. Being inside the machine allowed him to accumulate a rare kind of power, knowledge. While he lacked armies or political rank sufficient to dictate outcomes, his insights into human behavior and political mechanics were sharper than those who held formal authority. He could predict reactions, anticipate moves, and comprehend the levers of control with clarity that most rulers lacked. Observation became his method of preparation, a form of influence that required no announcement. He was shaping understanding rather than seeking immediate command. In Florence, the stakes were high and the environment unstable. Families rose and fell on a whim, alliances shifted, and betrayals were commonplace. Machiavelli's role demanded discretion and analytical rigor. He was constantly evaluating not just what happened, but why it happened. Every meeting, negotiation, or report provided data. Every glance, hesitation, or tone revealed patterns of decision-making. Through careful attention, he developed a mental map of the machinery of power, a map that would later form the foundation of his writings and theories. This process highlights a subtle truth about influence: it does not always require action first. Understanding the system deeply can precede control, giving a quiet advantage to those who prepare thoughtfully. Machiavelli's insight was that clarity about mechanisms and motivations allows one to operate effectively, even without formal authority. While others reacted emotionally or sought status, he observed, catalogued, and interpreted. The knowledge he amassed functioned as leverage, placing him in a position of strategic advantage despite the absence of visible power. For the viewer, this reframes how influence is perceived. Power is not merely what is exercised visibly, but also what is understood invisibly. Observing failures, successes, and patterns equips an individual with foresight, enabling them to navigate situations with precision. Machiavelli exemplifies the principle that clarity precedes control. The man who sees the structure and mechanics of authority can act decisively when the moment arises, often with far more impact than those who chase status blindly. By exploring this, the audience begins to recognize the value of patient, deliberate observation. Frustration with incompetent leadership transforms into insight. By understanding the underlying patterns, one can accumulate power silently, positioning oneself to act effectively within or alongside the systems that others take for granted. Observation itself becomes a tool, a form of quiet mastery, and a foundation upon which influence can be built without ever demanding it outright. Machiavelli's life took a sharp turn when political tides in Florence shifted violently. Once a trusted diplomat with access to the city's inner workings, he found himself suddenly stripped of office, influence, and security. Exiled and even subjected to brief imprisonment, he faced the harsh reality of marginalization. Many would have seen such a fall as the end of relevance, yet for Machiavelli, it became the beginning of a new form of power, one untethered from titles or immediate authority. In retreat, he found the freedom to think, analyze, and distill the essence of human and political behavior. In the countryside, removed from the constant demands and distractions of the court, Machiavelli began to write. The Prince emerged from this period, a work that codified the mechanics of power with unmatched clarity. Stripped of office, he was no longer constrained by allegiance or expectation. He could observe and reason freely, turning personal setback into intellectual leverage. Whereas others might have lamented loss, Machiavelli converted it into perspective, producing insights that would influence generations far beyond Florence. His authority shifted from the external to the internal, from position to perspective. This inversion of power highlights a crucial lesson. Removal from a system can sharpen understanding in ways participation sometimes obscures. Without the pressure to act within established hierarchies, Machiavelli could see patterns others missed. He analyzed the rise and fall of rulers, the motivations of generals, and the vulnerabilities of states with objectivity that proximity to power often undermines. In exile, he honed a vision of authority that was independent of circumstance, one that relied on clarity, foresight, and strategic reasoning rather than immediate control. For the audience, this moment is transformative. Career setbacks, exclusion, or demotion experiences that initially feel limiting can be reframed as opportunities for reflection and preparation. Machiavelli demonstrates that insight gained in solitude or adversity can outweigh temporary loss of influence. Knowledge and perspective accumulate quietly, creating leverage that later manifests with far-reaching impact. The absence of immediate power becomes a laboratory for strategic thought, a space to convert personal challenge into lasting authority. By observing Machiavelli's response to exile, the viewer begins to understand that power is not a static possession, but a dynamic interplay of perception, preparation, and action. Losing position does not mean losing potential, it can instead sharpen judgment, refine strategy, and create influence that is both resilient and profound. In this inversion, the audience sees the paradoxical advantage of absence, recognizing that sometimes stepping back can position one further forward than participation alone ever could. Machiavelli's genius lay in his willingness to see the world as it truly was, not as society wished it to be. He stripped away moral idealism, exposing the mechanics of power in their raw, often uncomfortable form. Rulers, he observed, acted out of self-interest, fear, and ambition rather than virtue or fairness. By confronting these truths, he revealed patterns that others ignored or denied. This honesty was dangerous, challenging prevailing norms, yet it was also profoundly liberating. Knowledge of reality, unfiltered and precise, became a tool, one that allowed insight to replace reliance on fortune or goodwill. In his writings, Machiavelli dissected authority with surgical precision. He examined how fear and favor could be wielded, how loyalty was conditional, and how instability created both risk and opportunity. By naming power's mechanisms openly, he provided a blueprint for navigating them, not through idealistic hope, but through comprehension. The clarity he achieved was itself a form of leverage. Where others floundered in wishful thinking, he acted from understanding, demonstrating that seeing clearly is the first step toward autonomy. This perspective reframes ambition and hierarchy for the viewer. Influence is rarely fair, and authority is seldom rational. By accepting this, one gains freedom, freedom to operate strategically, freedom from illusions, freedom to act decisively without being bound by conventional moral expectations. Machiavelli's realism does not advocate cruelty for its own sake, it advocates awareness. Understanding the truth of human behavior, he suggested, is the foundation for thoughtful action and durable influence. For men seeking psychological sovereignty, this lesson is subtle but powerful. Recognizing the real drivers of systems allows one to navigate them consciously rather than reactively. Knowledge becomes armor, observation becomes leverage, and clarity becomes freedom. Machiavelli demonstrates that intellectual honesty is not a threat, it is the gateway to self-directed authority. The empowerment comes quietly. By seeing systems and people as they are, the viewer begins to experience a shift in perception. Autonomy, previously constrained by expectation and idealism, now feels attainable. This realization that reality itself can be studied, understood, and engaged with deliberately plants the seed for informed action and measured influence, a foundation upon which true power can be built. True influence often begins in silence. Da Vinci and Machiavelli both demonstrate that competence, cultivated privately, can generate far more leverage than any public display of ambition. Skill and understanding grow in quiet spaces, away from scrutiny and expectation. In these moments, preparation becomes invisible power. The man who hones his craft without announcing it develops a presence that commands attention naturally, without force or declaration. There is a subtle authority in readiness, a gravitational pull created not by noise or posturing, but by the confidence that comes from mastery itself. Private competence allows the individual to act decisively when opportunity arises. Unlike those who broadcast ambition, hoping to attract notice, the quietly prepared are not dependent on perception. Their abilities function as tools, ready to be applied strategically. This approach fosters calmness, because the individual does not need external validation to feel capable. Observation, skill building, and reflection occur in a space free from distraction, producing a depth of understanding and resilience that cannot be achieved under constant display. In essence, mastery cultivated privately becomes a form of subtle influence that others recognize instinctively. There is an almost magnetic quality to such individuals. Colleagues, rivals, and superiors sense competence even before it is called upon. It is the calm assurance of someone who knows what they can do and when to do it. This presence is not theatrical, it is grounded, deliberate, and informed by preparation. Those around them may not immediately perceive the full extent of their capability, but they feel it. Quiet preparation becomes a silent language of authority, signaling readiness and intelligence without need for words. By combining skill with discretion, one shapes perception as much as ability. Da Vinci's meticulous studies and Machiavelli's patient observation were not performed to impress contemporaries, they were conducted to position themselves effectively for moments of need. When these moments arrived, their competence spoke louder than any proclamation. This principle highlights an actionable model. Growth and influence do not require constant advertisement. The unseen accumulation of skill produces leverage that manifests naturally, creating openings for decisive action without the friction of overt self-promotion. For the viewer, this model reframes personal development and influence. Power is not about making others aware of what one can do, it is about ensuring that capability exists and is accessible when context demands it. Calm, deliberate, and capable, the individual who embraces this approach builds authority in layers, preparing to act with impact while maintaining discretion. The combination of private competence and public calm establishes credibility without coercion, creating the foundation for sustainable influence. Reflection deepens as the audience considers their own environment. Are they performing for notice, or are they cultivating mastery quietly, accumulating capability that will reveal itself when it matters most? This quiet strategy requires patience and discipline, yet its rewards are disproportionate. True leverage, as demonstrated by historical examples, favors those who act thoughtfully, who prioritize depth over display, and who allow readiness to speak on their behalf. The lesson is subtle but clear: competence need not be broadcast to be powerful. Its strength lies in accumulation, timing, and calm application. Public acknowledgement may follow, but it is incidental. The viewer begins to visualize a behavioral model that relies on preparation, restraint, and steady presence, an approach that cultivates respect, influence, and opportunity without the strain of self-promotion or external validation. True power is not only built in private, it is revealed with intention. Leonardo da Vinci provides a perfect example. He did not display his mastery of military engineering at every opportunity. Instead, he chose moments when his skills aligned with pressing need, presenting solutions that were impossible to ignore. Similarly, Machiavelli did not broadcast his insights on statecraft to Florence while serving in office. His writings, including The Prince, were crafted and shared strategically, at a time and in a form that would maximize impact. In both cases, visibility was deliberate, measured, and tied to opportunity rather than ego. Timing is a subtle but decisive multiplier of influence. Revealing capability too early can provoke skepticism, envy, or resistance. Colleagues or rivals may interpret skill as threat, or the audience may be unprepared to appreciate its value. Conversely, revealing it too late can mean missed opportunities, moments when action could have shifted outcomes are gone. Strategic visibility balances patience and initiative. It requires a clear sense of context, understanding both the environment and the stakeholders, as well as the readiness of the individual to act effectively when called upon. This approach transforms competence into leverage. By controlling when and how ability is seen, the individual maintains authority without appearing desperate or overexposed. The quiet accumulation of skill is supplemented by carefully orchestrated demonstration, creating a narrative in which the observer naturally recognizes value at the precise moment it is needed. The effect is gravitational. Others respond not to claims of capability, but to the undeniable presence of demonstrated competence. For the ambitious yet restrained professional, this principle offers a practical lesson. Visibility is not constant, it is selective, intentional, and strategic. Each revelation of skill or insight should serve a purpose, whether it is to solve a problem, gain influence, or secure trust. Learning to read context, anticipate reactions, and gauge timing becomes as critical as developing the skill itself. The tension inherent in strategic visibility is instructive. How does one know the right moment? Experience, observation, and judgment become the tools to navigate this question. Leonardo and Machiavelli illustrate that calculated exposure, when paired with preparation, amplifies power more effectively than continuous self-promotion. Influence is strongest when revealed with precision, creating impact while preserving autonomy, discretion, and the respect earned through competence. In this way, strategic visibility transforms silent preparation into tangible authority. It is the bridge between private mastery and public influence, demonstrating that when skill is revealed thoughtfully, it commands attention naturally, opens doors, and consolidates power without forcing recognition. Leonardo da Vinci and Machiavelli both lived amid volatility, where fortune shifted abruptly and recognition was never guaranteed. Leonardo's illegitimate birth and lack of formal status placed him outside conventional hierarchies, while Machiavelli's exile stripped him of official authority and influence. Yet, neither man's sense of self wavered. Their identity was rooted not in titles, rank, or external validation, but in their mastery, observation, and the integrity of their thought. They measured themselves by what they could create, understand, and contribute, rather than by what others decreed worthy. This internal foundation provided resilience that external circumstances could not undermine. This independence of identity allowed them to act with freedom and clarity. Detached from the constant pressure of social recognition, they were able to explore ideas and take risks that might have been impossible if their self-worth depended on approval. Leonardo could innovate across disciplines, mixing art, science, and engineering with a boldness that outsiders might have considered reckless. Machiavelli could analyze rulers and write candidly about power without the constraints imposed by the desire for immediate favor. In both cases, their autonomy of self enabled courage, insight, and strategic action. For the reflective viewer, this principle offers profound psychological grounding. The external world, its hierarchies, accolades, and fluctuations, cannot dictate inner stability. By tying identity to capability, thought, and preparedness, rather than to recognition, one achieves a subtle yet enduring freedom. Success and influence become byproducts of competence, not the sole arbiters of self-worth. The pressure to perform for approval diminishes, leaving space for deliberate growth and strategic positioning. This mindset transforms setbacks into neutral events rather than existential threats. When positions are lost, recognition withheld, or authority challenged, the individual who anchors identity internally remains unshaken. The ability to act decisively and thoughtfully persists, because self-worth is not contingent on outcomes beyond one's control. Leonardo and Machiavelli illustrate that calm autonomy emerges not from security in status, but from security in skill, insight, and reflection. The lesson for the audience is subtle but powerful. Detachment from external validation fosters resilience and composure, creating a stable platform from which action can be taken with clarity and confidence. The viewer begins to quietly assess personal attachments, noticing where identity has been linked to transient titles or opinions. In this reflection, a sense of calm sovereignty begins to emerge, an inner authority that exists independently of circumstance, enabling strategic and deliberate engagement with the world. Though centuries separate Renaissance Florence from today's workplaces and social networks, the dynamics of power remain surprisingly consistent. Titles, corporate ladders, and online influence function as modern equivalents of dukes, courts, and city-states. Organizations, like city-states, are filled with ambition, rivalry, and rapid shifts in fortune. Authority can be fleeting, and recognition often depends more on perception than merit. Understanding these patterns allows the observer to navigate complexity with foresight rather than frustration. The tools of influence, skill, observation, and strategic presentation remain effective even as the outward forms of hierarchy evolve. In contemporary offices, boards, or digital communities, waiting for permission still lingers as a subtle trap. Promotions, approvals, or public acknowledgement are not guarantees, they are often contingent on timing, perception, and politics. Those who cultivate capability privately and choose their moments to reveal it hold an advantage similar to that of Da Vinci or Machiavelli. Quiet preparation, paired with strategic visibility, allows one to act decisively when opportunity intersects with readiness. The structures may appear different, but the psychology of influence, the interplay of competence, perception, and timing remains unchanged. Recognizing these parallels provides clarity amidst apparent chaos. Leaders may be incompetent, rivals may overestimate their control, and circumstances may feel unpredictable. Yet the underlying mechanics are consistent: skill accumulates silently, observation produces foresight, and strategic action converts preparation into influence. Understanding this pattern allows the individual to operate effectively without waiting for formal approval or external validation. By observing behavior, interpreting dynamics, and positioning capabilities thoughtfully, one can navigate modern hierarchies with agency and composure. For the viewer, the historical distance collapses. Renaissance lessons are not relics, they are templates for modern strategic behavior. Competence, discretion, timing, and independence of identity are as applicable to corporate meetings, online engagement, or professional negotiations as they were to the courts of Florence. The challenge is to internalize these principles, recognizing that human psychology, the desire for status, the susceptibility to influence, the tension between appearance and reality remains constant across eras. In this recognition, the audience begins to see opportunity where others see only structure or bureaucracy. The man who does not wait moves through life with quiet purpose. He builds skill in private, studies systems with patient attention, and positions himself where opportunity meets readiness. He does not seek permission, accolades, or approval. His growth is self-directed, disciplined, and deliberate. This approach cultivates a subtle authority, one that does not rely on noise or recognition to exist. Influence, in this context, is an emergent property of preparation, observation, and thoughtful action. He observes the patterns around him, noting the behavior of leaders, colleagues, and competitors. He anticipates shifts, reads moments of opportunity, and acts when conditions align, not before, not after. In doing so, he exercises sovereignty over his own trajectory, independent of the whims of systems or the judgments of others. His identity is anchored in competence, judgment, and reflection rather than external markers of success. This posture encourages calm confidence. There is no need to compete for attention or to assert dominance. The individual's readiness communicates value naturally. By focusing on skill, timing, and positioning, he operates within the world effectively while remaining internally steady. Authority, in this sense, is not demanded, it emerges from alignment between preparation and context. For the viewer, this reflection invites subtle recalibration. The lesson is not about ambition or achievement in the conventional sense, but about the quiet accumulation of influence and autonomy. By internalizing competence, observing systems, and acting strategically, one can navigate complexity with calm assurance. The shift is almost imperceptible, a change in posture, a steadying of thought, and a recognition that power need not be granted to be exercised. In the end, the man who does not wait embodies a mindset that blends patience, foresight, and self-reliance. The viewer leaves not stirred by hype, but grounded, reflective, and subtly empowered, aware that true influence arises from deliberate preparation, strategic visibility, and independence of identity.